Deconstructing faith. What does it mean, and how can we help those who are doing it? Let's talk about it with Trevin Wax on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we're so glad you're here. And as I always say and always mean, you always have a place at our table. And incidentally, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter, our executive producer, is here. Matthew, school is now ended for your 4 children. How are you spending the summer break?
Actually, a surprising amount of time is spent just putting sunscreen on these children. They are very, very pale children. So you just got to slather on that SPF 1000.
It's a part of your mission in life.
You use a paintbrush?
They're flammable.
You have to go to the beach
It's a
to do
paintbrush.
that, right?
Paintbrush or a pump sprayer, one of the two.
That's it.
Our producer, Jinx, is working hard in his little glass booth. Jinx is such a good guy. He once donated a kidney to a friend. The friend was confused. He didn't need a kidney.
He's a good guy.
Others write this, like Matthew. I just read.
It wasn't my kidney. I just got it.
Our video director, John Myers, is in his tech bunker. John is a kind, soft-spoken. Honestly, I'm suspicious. It's always the quiet types. And Kathy Wyatt is the soft feminine side of the program. Kathy suffers from eye strain brought on by rolling the eyes at these jokes that Matthew wrote. I realize that one should take credit for things like this, but I didn't do this. And I'm going to continue to say that I didn't do this. We got a great guest today. Trevin Wax, known as Trevin Wax. He's really Trevin Wax. He has a PhD from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and he serves as Senior Vice President of Theology and Communications at Lifeway Christian Resources. He is also a visiting professor at Wheaton College and the general editor of the Gospel Project. Trevin has authored multiple books and most recently contributed to a book that I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers. Before You Lose Your Faith, Deconstructing Doubt in the Church. Listen, I'm so glad for this book, frankly. People send me videos of sophomoric twits talking about why they left the bad, devilish, evangelical heritage of the faith. And I've read more books than you can believe on they're self-righteous, they're shallow for the most part, and they're sophomoric. And I thought, couldn't somebody spend some time talking about the other side? And then, Trevin, you guys did. And so I rise up and call you blessed. This is not a big book. It's not a hard book to get through, but it's a book you ought to buy at least 10 copies of it and give it to all 3 of your friends. And the ones that drive you nuts the most, give them 2. To let them know how important this little book is. How did this get started? Were you, well, nobody's as irritated as I am, but what did you guys do this for?
Well, you know, this started, Steve, from a friend of mine, Ivan Mesa. He's an editor with the Gospel Coalition and has a lot of connections in the evangelical world and in churches and with a lot of people he knows with expertise on various subjects. And I don't think it was irritation that led him to put the project together. I think it was a sense that we need to have this conversation with people who may be wrestling with some of these struggles. Maybe they've read some of the resources you're talking about and are asking some questions, but don't know where to turn for some good resources. And in order to be able to provide a counterpoint for some of those resources. So I think it came really out of his desire to compassionately but convictionally engage some of the questions that are being raised by some of the louder voices who are deconstructing their faith or leaving the evangelical heritage, either for a different kind of Christianity or leaving the faith altogether.
It's not, I'm old. It's not as if I haven't experienced about everything that are talked about in those books. And sometimes I want to say, you don't know nothing. I could tell you stories that would curl your toes. But as Augustine said, the church is a whore, but she's my mother. And you can't be an outsider of the human race. I have a very low view, as does the Bible and Orthodox Christian theology of human nature. And because of that, you're going to find the same thing with Rotary Club, with every church you're a part of, with all religions, all nations, all political viewpoints. And that's not just that I'm a cynical old preacher. I believe that what I just said is a fact. And I don't think anybody who wrote these essays in this book, Before You Lose Your Faith, is not aware of that. I think they struggle too. I suspect you have too. Have you been there? Have you done that? Have you thought, listen, I'm going to be a Buddhist. I can't deal with this anymore.
Now, I have not been at that place where I was thinking about walking away from Christianity altogether. One of the places I have been, though, was, around the time that I was just beginning to read a little more about theology and Christian doctrine and whatnot. There were a lot of people writing about how the traditional doctrines of Christianity, they're too black and white. We need a lot more ambiguity, a lot more mystery, a lot more fuzziness, a lot more just embracing the fog, so to speak. Not really, almost as if the people that have come before us were simpletons.
Yeah,
was the impression that I would get. And that was attractive to a lot of people my age. I think back to my 20s and I think about, they were asking some good questions about the church in previous generations. They were putting their finger on some things that probably needed to be changed or reformed. But it didn't take long before I felt like the version of Christianity that was on offer by a lot of those writers was domesticated. It was overly sanitized. It was actually well in step with the feelings and the fads of the current culture. And so once I realized that, I started digging deeper into historic Christianity, and that's where I found mystery and beauty and wonders that I hadn't even encountered before.
Oh, that's so good. By the way, I come at this in a different direction. The second essay in the book by Ian Harbour, it has a great title. It said, Progressive Christianity was even shallower than the evangelical faith that I left. Well, I didn't leave it. I came to it from progressive Christianity. I was at a graduate school just this side of wacko, liberal, and progressive. And I already learned this is not working. It's not going to work. And if I embrace this as a pastor, nobody's going to change. It's not going to fix anything. And it's not, nobody's going to deal with their guilt and shame and fear with this nonsense. I wasn't stupid, but at least I recognized that. And so God, in his kindness, introduced me to some people who were intellectuals. I thought I was, and who ate my lunch. And then I began with you to look at Orthodox Christianity. And out of that, I became the spiritual giant who is talking to you today, and talking way too much, by the way. This segment is coming very quickly to an end. When we get back, we're going to look particularly at doubting your way back to the truth. Trevin's essay in this book. Meanwhile, look this book up and get it. And we're going to tell you where you can in a little bit. It's called Before You Lose Your Faith, Deconstructing Doubt in the Church. It is a timely and wonderful book, and you'll want to study it in small groups and give it to everybody that you know. We'll be back with Trevin in just a minute. Meanwhile, this is really hard work, and so we're gonna rest up, take a nap, have some cookies and milk, and then, like Jesus, we're gonna return. Hey, we're so glad you're here. We're talking with Trevin Wax, known as Trevin Max. Trevin has authored a bunch of books, and most recently contributed to a book we're talking about, Before You Lose Your Faith, Deconstructing Doubt in the Church. Trevin, the essay that you wrote, which, by the way, is the first one in the book, is an interesting essay, Doubt Your Way Back to Truth. I thought that was the way you left.
Right. Well, there's more than one way to doubt, or I should put it this way, there's more than one direction in which to point your doubts. And what I'm trying to do with this opening essay for the book is to help people that are doubting, that have been through a process, or perhaps in the process of doubting a lot of the Christianity, a lot of the teachings that they've grown up with. They probably come to wrestle with a lot of that. And what I want to say to those people is, if you've arrived at this place where you would no longer consider yourself, a Christian, or even, just no longer adhere to the evangelical heritage that you grew up in, or maybe you've left the faith altogether. My goal with this book would be to say, you've put your old Christian convictions under a lot of scrutiny, intense scrutiny, and you've doubted a lot of the things you've been taught. But what you need to do now, to be fair, is you need to put your newfound faith under the same kind of scrutiny. You need to doubt some of the doubts that you've come to believe to be true. And so a lot of times people will say, well, what do you mean newfound faith? I'm the one walking away from the faith. It's not exactly what's happening. When you walk away from the faith, you still have beliefs. You still have assumptions. You still have things you think are true about the world, or about religion, or about the way things are, or the way things should be. The question now is to actually put yourself under the microscope, and then to be able to put that newfound identity as the one who has deconstructed, to put that deconstruction process itself under deconstruction as well. I think that's one of the ways it seems counterintuitive, but I think instead of just telling someone, just believe again, just work your way back the other way. I want to say, no, actually work farther towards the bottom of what it is, that deconstruction process that you're doing, and then begin to ask yourself questions that are going to lead to that kind of intense scrutiny of your new beliefs.
What would be, just kind of quickly, some of the areas that would be questioned in the newfound faith?
Well, one would be, just the entire way, the narrative that you present your life and the way that you tell your Christian story. Because the reality is, all of us see ourselves as part of a story. All of us see our life in terms of a journey to some extent. We just can't help it. We are narrative creatures. And so for many people, those who have gone through this process of deconstruction basically tell their story this way. They tell their story as, I once was this unenlightened person who believed all of these things that were just foisted on me by my religious community, but I became independent as a thinker. I thought through all of these things myself. I moved away from these silly superstitions of the past that actually weren't that good for me and actually weren't that good for the world. And now I'm standing on my own 2 feet, and I have this new identity as having walked away from that. That's sort of this. I've freed myself from the church and from those behind me, and now I am moving forward as this new individual. And what I would want to say is, that's a story that you may tell about yourself, but that story should also come under scrutiny. It lines up actually pretty well with the Enlightenment understanding of humanity, that the light came on in the 1700s with the age of reason, and we've moved away from religion all these years, and now we're on this upward trajectory toward more science and technology and things like that. And now you're sort of joining the enlightened over against those who have come before you. That's a faith in itself as well. And so the purpose of this chapter is to say, don't just interrogate Christianity, interrogate the newfound faith that you are now subscribing to after having left Christianity. Put that under the microscope as well. And you may find that some of the questions you ask don't find easy answers with that newfound faith.
So good.
It seems like this idea of deconstructing faith, deconstruction, could cover kind of a gamut of different paths, everywhere from people going, you know what, I believed it, I don't believe it anymore, which feels more like just, I'm like rejecting it. I'm not deconstructing it. I'm kind of tossing it, defenestration of it. To, I'm trying to pull apart what is my faith and what is tradition or custom, and examining each one, almost like pulling a watch apart and cleaning it and see is that an accurate assessment of what deconstructing faith is? And could that be a positive thing?
I prefer a different word for that. Some people do say they're deconstructing their faith when they're doing that second thing that you just mentioned. There's a better word for that I've heard a couple of people use that we call disenculturation, which is a harder word. No one's going to probably use it as much.
It sounds smarter though. So
it does sound smarter. What it means is, have you been able to figure out what is core to Christian orthodoxy? And what are the cultural trappings that maybe your church community, or maybe you just sort of grew up in a religious environment and may have been, on a spectrum of helpful to harmful? How can you disentangle those things, disenculturate true Christianity from some of the cultural expressions that rise up around Christianity? I think that process is vital. It's very important. One of the things I tell people who ask the question, well, how do I go about figuring out what is essential versus what is non-essential? I usually point them in 2 directions: to the church throughout history and to the global church. Because the way you disenculturate is you have to get out of your particular time and place. And if you can figure out what is common to all Christians everywhere, then you recognize, okay, these are the essentials. This is what really unites. Some of these other things may be culturally influenced in one way or the other. And if you can go back through time and see what Christians have always believed, Well, then you also recognize you're standing on the shoulders of a lot of people throughout time and history as well. And that, for me, is vitally important to help people to own their faith for themselves rather than just accept whatever's been given to them.
Oh, so good. So good. By the way, I've always, I see the cultural, societal stuff that gets involved with evangelicalism. But basically, my evangelical heritage is simple Christian orthodoxy, historic truth that Christians have always believed. And I would prefer we defined evangelical that way, but people won't, because you can't feel self-righteous if you define it that way. We're coming back. Hey, we're glad you're here. What a great conversation that we're having with Trevin Wax. In fact, a profound conversation in many ways. By the way, you can keep up with him at Trevin, that's Trevin Wax, WAX, TrevinWax.com, and on Facebook and Twitter at Trevin Wax.
Trevin, we were kind of joking earlier. Your name rhymes with the guy from DC Talk, Trevin Wax, Kevin Max. But then we were kind of like during the break, we were talking about it further. Kevin Max is actually one of the folks who is in this kind of ambiguous but broad category of people who have identified as quote unquote ex-vangelicals. And I confess this is not Jesus-like. I see a bunch of people and friends and acquaintances going, I'm ex-vangelical. I'm like, this feels like the new, stonewashed jeans or, yeah, I get it. It's trendy. Yes. You've got a tribal tattoo. You're cool. Can we stop this conversation now? But I know that there's a lot of sincerity in the journey for a lot of those people. I wonder if you could talk about what is deconstructing your faith and what is ex-vangelicals? How are those related? And how can we love on people who put themselves in that camp?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to put all ex-vangelicals or all the people that are going through a process of deconstructing or doubting their faith in the same category, obviously, because I know you wouldn't do that either.
No, I would.
You would.
No, I wouldn't. I'm kidding.
I mean, the challenge. So the ex-vangelical thing is a little bit of there's a little bit of a trendy kind of a hashtag feel to it, which in my mind, that's people that have deconstructed or are deconverting or have left evangelical churches and want to be public about it. Like that's become their new, if evangelical Christian was once their identity marker, now not being evangelical Christian is their identity marker. What's interesting though, is in most of those cases, they're still being defined by evangelicalism.
Just inverse.
It's just the inverse. It's that I'm not. And I think the reason it gets a lot of publicity is because it's so unusual. If you actually look at the statistics of people who are converting to Christianity versus those who are walking away from Christianity, the number of people coming into the faith far exceeds those who are leaving the faith, which is why it's newsworthy when someone prominent comes into the faith, leaves the faith rather than people coming into the faith. So I think that's something to keep in mind. It's not like there's this equal number that's taking place. But I would want to say there are a lot of people struggling and who are doubting things. We live in a secular world that praises doubt, that champions, celebrates doubt. And unfortunately, we live in a lot of our churches, we condemn doubt. just outright. And what I want to say to people who are in a congregation, maybe they're doubting quietly. They don't have the hashtag. They're not doing anything loud. They're asking questions, or they're afraid to ask questions because they do have some doubts, and they're afraid their church would condemn them for having doubts. There is a difference between faith seeking understanding and unbelief seeking justification.
Oh, man.
And a good pastor, a good Christian leader is going to recognize the difference in different kinds of questions and definitely want to help those who are like the father in the story of Jesus with the demon-possessed boy saying, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. The response to a culture where doubt is celebrated should not be a church where all doubt is condemned. We need to be a place where we anticipate doubts rising and help people walk through that. And that's one of the things I think that this book is trying to do.
It seems like when those conversations do first surface, there's a really small critical window in your reaction where you're going to have a reflexive response, and you need to let that moment pass and listen to the heart of what they're saying, not just like, well, don't try to argue them out of, this doubt, but love them through that, and maybe even celebrate the fact that their faith is mature enough. They're asking some hard questions.
Oh, absolutely. We are, the Christian faith is 2,000 years old. So many questions that get asked. And I mean, Steve mentioned some of the shallow and sophomoric ways of, they're a lot of times they're dealing with things at a very superficial level that have been addressed pretty well by people far more brilliant than anyone on this call. No offense to Steve. That's just the truth of it. And so what I think is important is, there are going to always be people who are coming in and out of the faith. I would just want people to at least have wrestled with the very best answer givers to some of these problems and things that challenges that get raised.
Oh, man, this is such good stuff. And if you leave your evangelical heritage without thinking about it, you're crazy. But if you should leave this program without seeing the rest of it, you're even crazier. If anybody asks you what you're watching or listening to on the radio, turn your nose up, let your peacock feathers fly in the breeze, and say, I'm listening to Steve Brown, etc. And you're not, we're going to come back. Don't you dare go anywhere. Hey, we're glad you're here. Fascinating conversation. And the book, by the way, is titled Before You Lose Your Faith, and it's Deconstructing Doubt in the Church. And we're talking about that. By the way, if you're one of our YouTube subscribers at YouTube.com Key Life Network, thank you. John says I'm supposed to ask if you would also comment on our videos and share them, because that helps the algorithm or whatever, something like that. John, I hope that was close enough to what you asked for.
Just comment on the videos. I'm just as we're talking through this and looking at, especially with all of the trends that are running around in the world, these people that are leaving evangelicalism or leaving the faith for a half faith or even a no faith, Do we really think they're leaving, or are they just hiding from something?
I think as Pascal said, the heart has its reasons, right? There are so many different ways and reasons in which we may want the faith to be true, and also may want aspects of the faith not to be true. None of us are just on an intellectual journey, a journey that when it comes to what is true or not. And I think one of the things that's changed in the last generation has been we've, for a long time, and you all are, I'm sure, familiar with, different strategies of apologetics, not apologizing for the faith, but doing a defense for the faith, being involved in making a defense of particular Christian truths. There's all sorts of books and things that are out there defending the historicity of the resurrection, for example, or the existence of God and why we would believe in him, or, the intersection between faith and science and things like that. But I think the question that many people wrestle with today is not so much, first off, is Christianity true? The question is Christianity good? Is it beautiful? Does it lead to human flourishing? Does it make the world a better place? And I think because a lot of the criticisms that come at Christianity, and a lot of the people that have left the faith will say they believe Christian teaching is harmful. Christian teaching is backward, perhaps, or it's not so much the intellectual challenge as the moral vision of Christianity that comes under fire. I've said a few times over the years that 100 years ago, a lot of Christians wanted the morals of Christianity without the miracles. Today, a lot of people want the miracles, but without the morals. Mm-hmm. And it all goes together. The same Jesus who performed miracles is the same Jesus who gave us the Sermon on the Mount and this extraordinary vision of what the kingdom of God looks like and what it's like when it's on display. So, if in answer to the question about are we hiding, I think the question of hiding honestly can be done. There are people that hide in the faith, not just from the faith. Mm. That hide in their self-righteousness in the church, not just in the way they leave the church. So I think the question of hiding is one that goes all the way back to the garden, where God shows up on the scene and says, Adam, where are you? And he was hiding. It is the nature of our humanity, our fallen humanity, to run and hide. So the question I think we've got to ask ourselves is, in what way might we be hiding, rather than simply looking at other people and the fig leaves they're trying to stitch on for themselves? We should ask the question, I think that's a question that should be pointed back at all of us, whether we consider ourselves faithful members of a congregation, whether we're struggling and doubting, or whether we've walked away.
Oh, man, so good. Kathy?
Trevin, I think I'm in the wrong boat here, but I'm struggling with this concept that's come to my mind. Seems to me that there's a difference between those who leave the church because of, whether you want to use the term doctrine or even the evangelicalism kind of thing or whatever, and those who leave because of church politics or policies, that kind of thing. The end result is the same thing. They leave. But I have a friend whose husband left the church that they had been in for years and years and years. And I would definitely describe him as somebody who is for sure a believer. He would not in any way describe himself as somebody who doesn't believe in the, quote, eternal verities of the faith. But at this particular point in time, he is not going to darken the door of a church. I myself, at one point in time, left a church, and I never felt like the church wasn't, that I didn't need the church, that I didn't need my faith, but I certainly did feel like I didn't need that thing. How does all of that fit into, or does it even fit into what you're talking about with all of this?
That's a great question. I think there's a distinction between those who have publicly deconverted, those who may be in a process of deconstruction, and then those who we would call the dechurched. Just they're on their own with God. They've left, and to be quite fair and honest, it's like what Steve said earlier, that quote from Augustine. I mean, sometimes people get out of the pool because the water is bad. I don't think there's anything wrong with us acknowledging that. The church is a mess. The church has been a mess for 2,000 years. Different churches have been messes. And I mean, we're all trying to sing this melody of Christian orthodoxy to some extent. And sometimes we can get one verse really well, and then the next verse, we are completely off key. Okay?
Yeah.
So I think the approach to someone who has left a bad church situation should be one of compassion first and foremost. But there is something in the air in our current culture that says the church is really just optional. It's an add-on to my personal spirituality. Really, where it's at is just me and Jesus. And that is foreign to all of church history and the New Testament. I think it's John Stott who says that the idea of an unchurched Christian is an anomaly in the New Testament. You won't find that in the New Testament. So I think the gentle prodding and the nudging to say we need community. The church is essential. It's not an option to just add on to our own spiritual self-help project.
And COVID has wreaked havoc with that.
Of course.
Because let's all go to church at a church that's 5,000 miles away from us because we like that preacher or we like that music or whatever. And, oh my gosh, yes.
Yes, so true.
Trevin, this has been an absolutely great time with you. I hope we can have you back. It's you are a thoughtful, profound, and fun guest. And you've written a lot of other good books that we ought to talk to you about. This one is called Before You Lose Your Faith. Get it. Share it with everybody you know. Thanks, Trevin, for being with us.
Thank you, Steve. Great to be with you guys.
Now we're going to come back and tell you who we're going to do it unto next week, so stay around. What a great time with Trevin Wax. We took a vote and decided that we're going to have him back. He says things in a way that are profound and cause lights to go on in your head. And he's so kind and so loving, and I'm not. And I was very arrogant and angry and irritated at the beginning of this program. If you were irritated and you're not going to check out the Christian faith because you don't like me, let me ask you to reconsider and forgive me. If you're just a twit, then deal with it. Actually, for me, because I'm into modernity and not post-modernity, truth is pretty important to me. And this book, among other things, recognizes the legitimacy of doubt, of asking questions, of being free and authentic. But it also deals with orthodoxy, with the Christian faith, what C.S. Lewis called in his great book, Mere Christianity, the kinds of things that Christians have held to be true for 2,000 years, have never wavered, never changed. We didn't always live it. We were often horrible sinners. The church has done bad stuff. But then that's the human proclivity and reaffirms the reality of the truth that the church has been teaching, that we are a fallen race. And that means that we all struggle with things that we wish we didn't have. So look at the truth of the Christian faith, measure yourself by it, think about it, deconstruct your doubt, and see what you come up with. You might be really surprised. Kathy, who's going to be on next week?
Next week, we have Cameron Cole. He has written a book which is titled Therefore I Have Hope. And this is a really great book. This guy the subtitle on it is 12 Truths That Comfort, Sustain, and Redeem in Tragedy. And this guy and his family have paid their dues when it comes to tragedy. So,
and we invited him because we like you guys a lot. And so if you're depressed and you're down, and every time you read the news, you turn suicidal, you're about ready to give up, to go to a cave somewhere and hide. And if that's where you are, you're going to like next week. You're going to feel a lot better and rise up and call us blessed. Please join us, same time, same place. And between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. That gives you a wide, wide berth. John, don't leave, because I want you to look at my computer.